and welcome to this episode of the Event Manager Podcast by Skift Meetings, the podcast for curious event professionals embracing the future of business events. My name is Andrea Doyle, and I am the Senior Editor of Skift Meetings. And in this episode titled Advocating for Change, I have the pleasure of speaking with Ren Akinci, Executive Vice President of People and Culture at Emerald. Our conversation revolved around the issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We talked about the fact that college degrees are no longer a requirement. And in 2021, Emerald removed college degree requirements from 90% of its jobs, focusing on skill-based hiring instead. We also chatted about pay transparency and how that helps create equity at a company. And finally, about how it's important to include all. I hope you enjoy listening to this conversation, and I invite you to check out other episodes of the Skift Meetings podcast, which you can find on our website or by subscribing through your favorite podcast service.
Now for a word from our sponsors, PHL Life Sciences, a division of the Philadelphia Convention and Visitors Bureau. Host your convention or trade show in Philadelphia, one of America's leading life sciences hubs. PHL Life Sciences, the first and only CVB division of its kind, will connect you to the professionals at the forefront of your industry and to a culture you can only find in Philadelphia. A city known for its rich history that's forging a bright future, Philadelphia challenges the expected and defies convention. A world of discovery is waiting. Visit phllife.com to learn more.
Okay, Ren, thank you so much for joining us. Would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Thank you for having me. I am Ren Akinci. I'm the Executive Vice President of People and Culture at Emerald. Emerald is a marketing and events company. We have over 700 employees in a global base. We have over 140 events and 16 media properties, as well as B2B, e-commerce, and digital merchandise solutions for our customers.
Okay, great. And how did you get involved in the meetings and events industry?
I got involved when I was 10, actually, way before I had a career in industry or in general. My parents owned dollar stores in Connecticut, and growing up, going to trade shows was part of the business. And it was exciting for me as probably going to an amusement park. The possibilities in those trade shows always seemed endless, and it was super fun seeing all the merchandise. Being a kid, seeing all the gift merchandise was super exciting for me. That was obviously many decades ago. Interestingly enough, I was at one of our shows, ASD Market, which takes place in Vegas. It's one of our bigger shows. And I was carpooling with a woman who remembered my entire family. She remembered my uncle's name, and we got to start talking about some of the business that she had done with them. So it was a really full circle moment, because it reminded me of what the trade show industry is all about, which is building relationships for small businesses and being very hands-on. So hearing her remember my uncle 20 years later was a very full circle moment, and something that I'm really proud of, because I think, Emerald has 80% of our customer base are small businesses, and we have that same approach with all of them, very hands-on, even way after the transaction is done. Building that relationship and sustaining that relationship is very important to us.
So that is the full circle. Your parents own these dollar stores, and those obviously are small businesses.
Exactly. Yeah. And, now I work for a trade show industry and happen to be in a car with someone who worked with my parents when I was 10.
Okay. And how exactly did you become Executive Vice President, People and Culture Officer? Because that's a very distinct position within a trade show company.
So Emerald calls our HR function People and Culture. Prior to Emerald, I worked for an advertising holding company. And before then, I was in news media. When people ask me what did I want to be when I grow up, my answer was always the same. And it was not HR, because I didn't even know HR existed. It was always to be a lawyer. For me, advocating for people was very important. And I thought, if I could advocate for someone, I would be fulfilled in my life. My trajectory on that changed a little bit after the financial crisis. My parents could not afford to send me to law school, so I knew that I had to do something else. And I landed in a position that helped me have exposure to HR. I was in a store manager for a retail position. And I realized, I could advocate for people and do great things for people without being a lawyer. So that was how I got into the HR industry, and I love it. And I think it's a really good career path for people who love advocating and doing what's fair by people.
Okay. Why are you so determined to support the empowerment of talent?
Personally, it's because in the beginning of my career, I had bosses who were not good advocates for me. And, whether that was for pay or advancement, they were very self-centered in their approach to their own career development and growth and did not really care about their teams. And, when you become in a leadership position, what shapes you is either the great bosses you had or the bosses who weren't so great. So you kind of basically take a little bit of both. Who do I not want to be and who do I want to be as a leader? Luckily for me, my experience with different type of bosses changed. Later on in my career, I had some amazing bosses and great advocates, which I still have right now in my life, great mentors. So I learned from them what to do while learning from some bosses what not to do. And part of that was being a good advocate for my team, and then obviously for the employee population as it relates to advancement and pay. If you love what you do, you do it because it gives you a sense of purpose and a sense of belonging. You feel like you're making a difference and you're making progress in something. And that's where the job satisfaction comes from at the end of the day. But of course, you also do it because you get paid to do it. So I strongly believe that pay is important, and I like being an advocate for it. And up until more recently, pay was a very taboo subject. Even amongst friends or family, you never talked about pay. You never asked somebody, how much are you getting offered, et cetera. And I'm seeing that change, that conversation change, even amongst friends and family. But it's also changing in the workforce. And part of that is because there are a lot of laws being passed right now. I believe it's 7 states, including California, New York, and Colorado, who are passing pay transparency laws. And the reason for that is because they want people to have exposure to what the leverage of salary could look like, and then negotiate their earnings and hopefully close the wage gap. And for your listeners who may not know what the transparency law is the states basically are asking all employers to put in the compensation ranges for all of the job descriptions. And for Emerald, we're not just doing it in states that are asking us to do that, New York, California, Colorado, but we're doing it for all states, even the ones that are not requiring it. And we believe that's important. The transparency is important for us.
And is that listing just for job candidates, or is it easily found on your website for all to see?
It's for job candidates, but it's on our careers page. It's on LinkedIn and it's on Indeed. Wherever we're posting jobs, it's easily visible to our employee population right now, as well as any candidates that are looking into possibly joining Emerald.
And what has been the feedback that you've received by doing that, Ben?
In the beginning, I believe, there's a little bit of skepticism around whether or not all companies were going to do it. I spoke to a lot of my HR colleagues, and their companies were looking for loopholes on not doing it. Obviously, at Emerald, we decided the right thing to do was to post that and be transparent across the board.
Okay. I mean, we've talked, for so many stories I've been working on about the importance of diversity, inclusion, and equity. And it's a huge focus there at Emerald. That's why I reached out to you, because I knew you would make a great podcast.
Thank you so much.
Can you talk a little bit about Emerald's diversity, inclusion, and equity efforts?
Sure. So I've been with Emerald for the past 2 years. Our entire leadership team, including and especially our CEO, believes in the importance of DE&I. And I think it's important for me to say that because I know that a lot of the times, a lot of the company's DE&I efforts are first focused on getting the buy-in from your CEO, getting the buy-in from your C-levels. I didn't have that experience, and I feel like our company is very fortunate for that. When I wanted to make our benefits more affordable while enhancing them, I didn't have to convince my CFO. He was already bought in. In fact, I learned how to effectively do that from him early on in my career when him and I overlapped at another company. When you don't have to get that buy-in, you could start putting all of your efforts into actually making progress. And that was the case for us at Emerald. So in 2021, we started with removing college degree requirements from 90% of our jobs. That was personally important to me because, as I shared with you earlier before, I felt like I didn't reach my full potential by not being able to go to law school. So for me, the degree thing was always a barrier between somebody's potential and their goals and where they were in the current state. So removing that was really important to me. And our CEO, Hervé Seki, was incredibly supportive of that. After that, we decided to focus on skill-based hiring instead. And what could that look like for us? And that resulted in us changing our job descriptions, training our employees on how to look for skills instead of just looking at the paper and eliminating or disqualifying somebody based on their credentials, their academic credentials. This year, we started a rotational associate program, which allows talent exposure to different parts of the business. We are requiring unconscious bias training for all of our hiring managers. So you have to go through this training before you could hire anybody on your team. And this is an annual requirement as a refresher. This is something that we built in-house. My talent acquisition team leads this. Danielle Antes is the one who's facilitating the conversation so that we could continue to teach our hiring managers how to, curb their unconscious bias during the hiring process. And then we added a designated budget for immigration sponsorship and visas that lives with the people and culture team. We also added transgender benefits and enhanced all of our existing women's reproductive health benefits so that we could have a more inclusive benefit design as well. Most importantly, we started utilizing data, the data that comes in from ADP, our HR systems. We're making progress there, but we want to make sure that the data is showing our progress so that it's not just anecdotal, that we actually have the data to back up our successes. So in 2022, more recently, we hired a DE&I chair, Ron Walden, to help us get organized and focus on what parts of DE&I we wanted to make commitments to. And for Emerald, it's in 3 parts. We have our people pillar, so that's the people and culture function, and what are we doing for our internal people? And then we have the community pillar. This means how do we serve the communities in which we do business in? And then the business pillar, which is how do we support minority-owned vendors and buyers as it relates to our business, or how are we supporting our vendors that we do business with? Where's our procurement money going, et cetera? So each of the pillar has an executive co-sponsor, and we have about 5 to 6 members from the Emerald community who raised their hand and said, I want to help shape our DE&I initiatives and our strategy moving forward. Obviously, we recognize that that's like a full-time job for somebody. So we're very appreciative of people who spend their time helping shape what our DE&I strategy is going to look like for everybody else.
Okay. You touched upon how Emerald has eliminated the need for college degrees. And, we talked about that for story skip meetings published last week. Can you elaborate a little bit where that came from, when you put this in effect, and what the response has been?
Sure. So I think in general, we all need to rethink the way we hire. You, Andrea, reported on the labor market shortage last week, and I want to give some context around that. There are about 11 million job openings right now and only 6 million unemployed workers. So that's a gap of 5 million in the US. The hiring is still strong. US added about 500,000 jobs in January. Unemployment still remains at a 50-year low. So we are in a labor shortage. And if we are only looking at people who have 4-year degrees, we're missing out on a whole market of talented, passionate, hardworking people who don't have the opportunities because of that one barrier, and that barrier being that they did not get a 4-year college degree. According to McKinsey research, hiring for skills is actually 5 times more predictive of a job performance than hiring for education. So removing that college degree forces us to look at a candidate based on their skills and their experience, as well as their interest in the role. Mm-hmm. So we removed 90% of the degree requirements from our jobs. Obviously, some of our jobs still has to have it. Our general counsel has to have a law degree, as an example. But, we want to just eliminate the barrier more than anything else.
So what you're saying is a degree doesn't determine your ability to thrive in a position.
Correct. And also, not everyone can afford to go to college, and maybe or they just don't want to be burdened with student debt. And there are also a lot of people outside of the cost factor who are just better learners in a non-traditional environment. So exactly what you said, your ability to thrive in a position, it should not be determined on whether or not you got a college degree.
Are you ready to celebrate your successes in the world of meetings and events? The Skift Meetings Awards are back for 2024, recognizing the most innovative business events companies across 15 categories, and we want you to be a part of it. Winners will feature on Skift Meetings, sending a clear signal to events professionals around the world that these are partners they can rely on. The final deadline for submissions is June 11th. We encourage you to start your submission today to secure the best entry rates. For more information and to start your submission, head to live.skift.com.
What has been the reaction to those who do have a college degree, who are burdened with student loan debt?
Yeah, so it was a lot of people embraced it. And then you obviously had some people that were offended by the idea that we were just now taking the requirement away. And, the sentiment there was, are you telling me that my degree does not matter? And I just want to reiterate that that's not what we're saying. The idea of removing a college degree was so that we could create equity, not to exclude other people. We acknowledge that there are a lot of talented people who don't have a 4-year degree, but we also acknowledge that there are a lot of people who have master's and a PhD. I would have loved to be one of those people. So I love school. I just couldn't afford it. So for me, removing that barrier is really just trying to level out the field a little bit by creating equity and not excluding somebody or telling somebody that their experience or their struggles to get that college degree or the burden of student debt does not matter. That's not what we're saying at all.
So you're not dismissing people's achievements who have degrees?
Correct. Of course not. We're just not putting a barrier for those who need life-sustaining jobs outside of, a retail environment and have careers that may have not had the chance to go to college, or they just simply learn better in a non-traditional work environment.
Mm-hmm. And I know, so this is one of the initiatives of your DEI focus at Emerald. How important is DEI to the success of a company?
I think if you're not going to focus on DE&I, you're going to leave a lot of people behind. That includes your customer as well as your talent. The world is changing. The US is changing. The demographics of our landscape is changing. So if you're only focused on the majority, what you consider to be the majority, you're going to miss out on a lot of incredible talent, diversity of thought, different experiences, as well as your buying power, your consumers' buying power. So I strongly believe in DE&I, obviously, but I think as a business purpose, it's definitely something that businesses have to pay attention to if they want to be relevant in the future.
Okay. And some companies say they have DEI, but then they don't really do anything about it. Isn't that worse? Like just saying you have such an organization, but then not having anything into place? I read somewhere that that's worse than not having anything at all.
I agree with that. I think what happens is a lot of the times there's good intention, but there are hurdles. So people tend to start with the DE&I mission and the communication part of it before doing the work. And we were actually very intentional about not doing that. I wanted to start doing the work first before we had a mission and a goal and a communications plan around how we were going to communicate some of the things we were doing. And the reason behind it is because I've seen, many times, to your point, companies releasing statements and comms efforts, but then they're not, they haven't been able to get to the work part yet. So I think it's important for people to start doing the work first and then having the work speak for itself and then being able to elaborate and then talking about the work that you're doing once you've started an action plan, which obviously is not always easy. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I think the most important part is if you don't have to get into the buy-in of your C-level, then you could start getting to the work fairly quickly. But if you're spending a lot of time trying to get that buy-in, I think that's where people tend to get stuck because they're not able to get over that hurdle.
So since you had the buy-in, you could just hit the ground running.
Exactly. And that was an incredible experience to not have to sell anybody on why this is an important thing for the company to do.
I mean, DEI is such a passion for you and for Emerald. Do you have any suggestions as to how a company can increase its DEI initiatives?
Yeah, I think every company should start with why it's important to your business and to your people first, and what you'd like to achieve in 1, 3, 5 years. I think that's really important to get down on a piece of paper, because otherwise you're going to, because there's so much to do. And, we've done a lot of things, but we have so much more work to do on this area. So it could get overwhelming really quickly if you don't get organized about what it is that you want to achieve and kind of have a mission on what areas that you wanted to tackle. For us, we did the college degree removal, and then we partnered with an organization called 110 because there was an alignment there on our values. So I think it's really important to be intentional about the goals and why those goals are important to you, because that's the only way you're going to be able to start working on them. Utilizing data as much as possible. And this doesn't have to be like sophisticated data. It's the data in your HR system, or if you're still using Excel spreadsheets on your Excel spreadsheet, that will show you where you are currently. And that is looking at the current demographic, who's in my female, who's in my leadership, senior leadership, what is the demographic of the female or non-gender identifying or male, what does that breakdown look like? Same with race. And then looking at where is the turnover? Is there a correlation between people who are underrepresented and turnover, and what are we doing there? So looking at the data as it relates to your company is a great start, because then you can kind of identify where you're falling short and where there's some trends. Looking at your current vendor spend and working with your procurement team on identifying opportunities where you can invest in minority-owned business is a great way to put your money where your commitment is. We have a procurement team who's dedicated to that and who's very intentional about that process. As HR, as a client during your RFP process, ask your vendors what their D&I mission and goal is. So holding your own vendors accountable, making sure you're spending money where people have a D&I process and a mission and a goal to support your own internal goals as well. So those are some important things that you could look at. But whatever the goal is, you just have to be intentional about it. And the reason for that is because making change requires a lot of effort. And if I'm being honest, thick skin, because not everyone is going to trust your intentions or be happy about the work that you're doing. Some people are going to feel like it's not enough, and they're right, but only you know how much work it takes to get from point A to point B, and that you have to start somewhere. And I think if you don't have an intentional approach that is aligned with the values of your company, supported by your executives, then skepticism will easily derail you. And, I think that's what you're referring to when you say that it doesn't launch as fast or they're not making progress. And I think it's because the intention was not as focused, or they didn't have the right support, so they couldn't get off the ground as quickly as they wanted to.
And I guess that's why it's important to have a timetable, like you said, 1, 3, 5 years, because change does require such effort.
Absolutely.
So, okay.
And, if you only have one goal or 2 goals that you're focusing on, a lot of the times people have a list of goals because it just seems like, you could just check them off really quickly. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of time. And, unless you have a dedicated D&I team, which we don't, then it's somebody else, a community of people like our D&I councils, second job. So in order to move the needle, you need to be very focused and intentional, and maybe work on like 1 or 2 things per pillar. Like for us, our people pillar has 2 or 3 goals. Our community pillar has 1 or 2 goals. So we're being very intentional about what we're putting our energy in, because recognizing that to move the needle, it's going to take a lot of time and effort. So we don't want to overwhelm ourselves by just having like a long list of things to do.
Okay. But you do have a diversity officer, you mentioned, right? Ron Walden?
He's so he leads our DNI chair. So it's part of his job, but it's not his full-time job, no.
Okay. And then, like you explained, you have other people who also have the dual roles.
Absolutely. So we have, on our people pillar, we have 5 or 6 people who are, different levels of the organization, different job functions, who said, I want to be part of this. Your mission is what I want to help support. So I'm going to sign in on this. And we meet weekly. We do our town hall. We do monthly town halls at our company. We give updates on a monthly basis. So it is a lot of effort on that sense. I mean, it's obviously great work, but I think, unless you have that support system around you, it's going to be harder to launch off the ground.
And it sounds like it's important to have like-minded people.
It's important to have people who are passionate about.
Passionate, that's what I mean.
Yeah, the work. Absolutely.
Okay. Because you don't want like-minded, you want a diversity of thought.
Absolutely. But you just want people who believe that this work is important.
Okay. You had meant
understand.
Mm-hmm. You had mentioned the importance of data. Are there sources where you go to get data that help you with your DEI initiative?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
You had mentioned data. Can you tell us about some resources you use for data?
Oh, absolutely. We use our HR system. We use ADP, so we use our HR system to pull the data that is internal. Other resources for DNI that are more about the business cases and more of the statistics, I use McKinsey. They publish a lot of amazing case studies. Harvard Business Review has a lot of articles that I find very informative. But my favorite is a website called Better Allies. I actually ask everyone on my team to subscribe to this, because they send you 5 actionable items each week on how to be a better ally in the workplace. And there are, 5 little nuggets that you could start acting on fairly quickly. And we can link those in the podcast for your listeners if they're interested. But those are my 3 go-to resources.
Okay, great. What do you feel the future holds for the industry?
I think, as it relates to D&I, I think, and maybe this is just wishful thinking for me, but I think we're going to see a lot of progress in the next 5 years. I'm seeing a lot of more data being published on D&I as it relates to our industry. I know you're writing a lot of articles on this, even this podcast, and I read some of the feedback from your articles, and people are very receptive and positive. And I think people want to learn on how to get into making a difference and making progress in D&I. So I'm feeling very hopeful about it.
Okay. In our podcast, we always ask our guests, how do you explain to friends and family what you do?
So my mom asked me once, is all you do talk and travel for work? She's like, and how do I get a job?
Oh.
The best way to explain what I do is I try to be the middle ground between commercial and people, right? Like making sure that we are fair to our business and fair to our people. It's a very delicate balance, but it's one that, when done correctly, is what makes any company thrive and what makes any of the talent happy. So for me, it's an advocate and being right in the middle ground and making sure that there's a balance between our business and our talent and that we're being fair to both.
So that's like throughout our conversation, I would say, to me, it seems your biggest passion is being an advocate.
Yes, it actually is what gives me job satisfaction.
Mm-hmm. Would you ever consider going back to law school? You mentioned that a few times.
If anyone on this podcast wants to pay for it, yes.
All right. You heard it here first.
Absolutely. I feel like I'm a lifetime learner. That's why I love reading articles and talking to people and listening to podcasts, reading books. I just love learning, whether that's in a classroom environment or outside of the classroom. But I do love going to school, like the actual act of going to school, sitting in the classroom, opening a book. I love it. So yeah, I would love to still go to law school for employment law, obviously, because I love HR.
Right. So it would be in the same field, what you're doing now.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Finally, we always ask our guests, who should we have on the next podcast?
I think I mentioned our partnership with 110, and I would love for our industry to know more about what 110 is as an organization and hopefully partner with them. They're a coalition of leading chief executives and their companies who are coming together to upskill and hire 1 million Black individuals who do not have a 4-year degree yet into family-sustaining jobs within the next 10 years. So 1 million in 10 years. And I think it's a really good initiative. And I think they're doing some great work, and they are very good at teaching HR teams and operation teams and whoever's involved in it how to actually hire for skill versus a 4-year degree, or how to invest in your talent acquisition team so that they're learning on how to do this, et cetera. So the work that they're doing is really impressive. They have some amazing clients like Delta, Cisco, and Walmart. And I do believe that there's an opportunity for the events industry to be a part of it. And, if you are able to get the team behind it on the podcast to give a little bit more information, I think that'll be really impactful. Okay,
I will definitely reach out. Have you hired anyone from 110 at Emerald?
So because we removed the college degree requirements earlier on, even before 110, we've just been hiring whoever we feel is the right person for the role, whether or not they have a college degree. We have not been tracking. It's not, as part of the we do background checks. We no longer check for employment verification, et cetera. So I'm sure we have been hiring people that are coming through 110, but we're not tracking it separately. 110 for us has been really valuable in teaching us how to better assess candidates based on their skills versus just a 4-year degree as a first requirement. So they've been really helpful, and there's a big community of thought leadership there that you learn from, and a lot of great case studies that they share with you. So they've been really helpful in helping us navigate so that we're actually hiring in a more impactful way.
Okay. I'm definitely going to reach out to them. And can you also tell me the name of the newsletter that you mentioned where you get actionable items about diversity and inclusion?
Better Allies.
Okay. And they give you advice on how to become a more inclusive organization?
They give you 5 actionable steps on how to become a better ally in the workplace. So you sign up for their subscription, like a weekly newsletter. They only email you once a week on Fridays, and it's 5 actionable steps. And sometimes they're linked to some more research and more detail, but it's really great because it really helps you have like an aha moment, or like gives you like an actionable item that you could use on Monday when you're back in the workplace.
I'm going to subscribe today. Is there anything else you would like to share with our listeners that I didn't ask?
I think if you have a listener who's trying to get the DE&I progress off the ground, or just need more information, I'm always happy to speak to them and be a thought partner and bounce some ideas off. Same with Ron, same with my talent acquisition team, who's doing a lot of impactful hiring with the unconscious bias training, et cetera. So any help that any of your listeners need, or more information that they need, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to talk about this.
Oh, that's great. Well, always a pleasure to speak with you. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Andrea. Thanks for being so supportive of the industry and our DE&I efforts.
Oh, of course. Thank you.
Thanks.